Now Ali was he was like well hated by the media in his day because of his trash talking, his arrogance, and of course his political stance as a black Muslim who refused to go to the Vietnam War. He claimed actually to be the greatest before he even was champion. He was claiming to be the greatest, and people get mad at Floyd at the end of his career, saying he's the best ever. But before Ali started his career, he was calling himself the greatest already, and people hated it at that time that he did that. Because of the greats like Lewis and Dempsey and all those guys. They were like, yeah, right, who are you? To call yourself the greatest. And he was not loved like how he's loved today in the media after the fact. And I believe that's going to happen in Floyd too. When he retires and leaves the sport, people will appreciate him more after that, even the ones that hate him today. Um, the media was constantly criticizing him about everything he did inside the ring and outside the ring. They criticized his opponents. They criticized this and that. They always were on Ali. They were not. They didn't like him, and they wanted him to get beaten. And they were happy when Joe Frazier gave him his first loss and broke his jaw. You know, because Frazier was not as outspoken as Ali was, so they wanted to shut him up. Just like many people today want to see Floyd get beat. It's no difference. Very similar to Floyd. The the political stuff is not as similar with Floyd, but so many other things are. Now, a lot of people have this belief that Mayweather is a ducker. He's scared. He doesn't fight the best. All he does is run. He should not be considered an all-time great, and so on and so on and so on. I believe all this is false, so I want to take fight by fight of Floyd's career and see if these accusations that these haters give him are true. The hate for Floyd did not start because he lacked skills or talent, but it came because Floyd's confidence, or his arrogance, as you want to say, that a lot of people just wanted to see him eat his words, and they still want to see him eat his words. Maybe if Floyd had lost a fight by now, they would already start liking him. But the Mayweather haters will start calling me a Flomo right about now. But I'm just a boxing fan, not just a Mayweather fan. I was a boxing fan before I ever knew who Floyd Mayweather Jr. was. And I will be a boxing fan long after he retires. In fact, I watched the Black Mamba, Roger Mayweather, long before I ever heard about Floyd. I've been watching boxing since I can remember. I grew up when you could watch boxing like on the regular channels like NBC, ABC, CBS every Saturday. I love the sweet science of the sport, the matchups of different styles, the technical skills of some of the greatest fighters of all time in the sports. I'll give you like my top 10 favorite fighters of all time list. Number 10 would be Charley Burley. Look him up if you haven't heard of him. He was a very defensive fighter, had a style similar to the shoulder roll. He used the shoulder roll in those days back then. And in fact, some people even said that Sugar Ray Robinson ducked Charley Burley. He was a guy that never became a champion because people didn't want to fight him because he was such a great defensive fighter. Another fighter is Eder Jofre, another great defensive fighter of his day. Look him up. And of course, Jack Johnson, number 8. Number 7, I go with Henry Armstrong. I go with Willie Pep at 6. I got Roy Jones Jr. at 5. Pernell Whitaker at 4. Muhammad Ali at 3. Floyd at 2. And I got Sugar Ray Leonard at 1. Now, these are not the fighters that I think are the best fighters ever. These are just my favorite fighters of all time. And Sugar Ray Robinson is number 11, so he's not on the list as my favorite fighters that I like to watch. But I could easily have him as my best fighter of all time. Now, this is not anything other than just giving you my list to show you that, I just love the sport of boxing. You can see by my list that I like skillful, defensive, and smart fighters. But anyway, let's move on and get to the career of Floyd Mayweather. First off, People try to question the fact that Floyd calls himself the best ever. But what they don't understand is that people in boxing used to talk about the potential of Floyd being one of the best ever when he was just in the amateurs. People act like Floyd was just some average fighter out of nowhere that just started saying he was the best. Floyd had an excellent amateur background. Floyd won the National Golden Gloves in 93, 94, and 96. He finished with an amateur record of 84-6. Floyd represented the U.S. in the 96 Olympics. He became the actual first U.S. boxer to defeat a Cuban in over 20 years. And just as a side note, the last fighter before him, 20 years before him, that defeated a Cuban in the Olympics was the great Sugar Ray Leonard. And Floyd was the first one after him. After 20 years of not being able to beat the Cubans, he beat a Cuban in the 96 Olympics. Sugar Ray Leonard did it in the 76 Olympics. Floyd had greatness already that was in his path, basically. The question was if he would be able to accomplish that greatness. You know, they had high hopes for him, but you don't know until a guy gets in there and proves it. To beat a Cuban fighter at the Olympics was big time for Floyd, because Cuban fighters are generally great amateur fighters. They still are to this day when you think about like Rigondeaux and so many others. The Cuban he beat was actually an amateur champion in Cuba at 3 different weight classes. You know, but moving on, Floyd was totally robbed of the gold medal, as many know, in those Olympics, and he had to settle for the bronze. You know, he definitely beat the guy that he fought, and they gave the fight to the other guy. Roy Jones Jr. was similarly robbed in the Olympics, same way. But he dominated the fight to me, in my opinion, and you can watch the fight. They got it on YouTube. You can watch it. You know, anybody who watches that fight can see that he was clearly robbed, whether you like Floyd or not. But this is when Floyd decides to turn pro, and he put the Olympic disappointment behind him. Floyd was basically on a mission, he said, to be one of the best fighters that ever lived. So this was no fake flukish thing that he now calls himself the best ever, or TBE. Now, what I doubt anybody would say Floyd started his career ducking anybody, because you only fight 4 or 6 round fights trying to move up and get experience when you start your professional career. You don't start your career fighting ranked fighters. So I will wait until we get to the fights where he became champion and started defending his title before we really focus on the ducking issue. But we still want to go through each fight and show who he was fighting and how those fights went.